a child's voice rose in the studio. And America's most powerful host became completely defenseless, put down his microphone, and cried. It was March 1982. The Tonight Show starring Johnny Carson. Studio 6B in Burbank. A Thursday night. The monologue had gone well. Johnny was on fire, the audience laughing at every punchline, Ed McMahon doing his signature laugh from the desk. Everything was running like clockwork. Johnny finished a joke about the economy and turned to acknowledge the applause. His eyes swept across the audience in that practiced way he perfected over 20 years of hosting, making 300 strangers feel like he was looking directly at each of them. And then he saw the child. Front row. Maybe 8 years old. Small for his age. Wearing a simple striped shirt and jeans. Sitting perfectly still while everyone around him laughed and clapped. The boy's hand was raised. Not waving excitedly like kids usually did when they wanted attention. Just raised. Steady. Patient. Like he had a question he'd been holding for a very long time. Johnny's smile faltered for just a second. Then, breaking from his usual routine, he pointed at the boy. Yes, young man? You have a question? The audience quieted, curious. This wasn't how monologues worked. Johnny didn't usually take questions during this part of the show. The boy stood up. His mother, sitting beside him, reached out to steady him, but the boy gently moved her hand away. He looked directly at Johnny Carson with eyes that seemed too old for his face. Mr. Carson, the boy said, his voice clear and surprisingly steady, carrying through the studio's sound system. Did your dad ever tell you he was proud of you? The studio froze. Carson stopped mid-monologue. The entire studio froze. Johnny's smile disappeared completely. His hand, which had been gesturing toward the audience, slowly lowered to his side. Ed McMahon's laugh cut off mid-breath. Doc Severinsen, about to cue the band for the next segment, held perfectly still. The question hung in the air like smoke. Johnny started then stopped. His jaw tightened. For the first time in 2 decades of hosting The Tonight Show, Johnny Carson appeared to have no idea what to say. The boy remained standing, waiting. Not demanding. Not pushing. Just waiting with the patience of someone who genuinely wanted to know the answer. The control room erupted in whispered chaos. Director Bobby Quinn leaned into his headset. Do we go to commercial? What's happening? Producer Fred de Cordova stood behind him, hand raised. No. Keep rolling. Johnny will handle it. But Johnny wasn't handling it. He was standing at his mark, beside his desk, staring at an 8-year-old boy who had somehow asked the one question Johnny Carson had spent 60 years avoiding. To understand what happened next, you need to understand what happened in 1925. Johnny Carson wasn't always Johnny Carson, beloved king of late-night television. He was born John William Carson in Corning, Iowa, to Homer and Ruth Carson. His father was a power company manager, strict, distant, emotionally unavailable in the way many men of that generation were taught to be. Homer Carson believed in hard work, discipline, and keeping emotions private. He believed boys should be tough. He believed praise made people soft. He believed the greatest gift a father could give his son was high standards and the expectation that those standards would be met without fanfare or celebration. Johnny grew up in that house. He learned magic tricks to get his father's attention. He performed at family gatherings, desperate for a smile, a nod, any sign that Homer noticed. Sometimes Homer would watch. Sometimes he'd leave the room mid-trick to read the newspaper. When Johnny got his first radio job at 14, reading commercials at a local station, he came home excited to tell his father. Homer was in the garage, working on the car. Dad, I got the radio job. They're paying me actual money. Homer didn't look up from the engine. Don't let it interfere with your schoolwork. That was it. No congratulations. No pride. Just a reminder not to fail at something else. Johnny worked harder. He got better at performing. He moved from radio to television. He became a regular on variety shows. He got his own show in the late 1950s. He became the permanent host of The Tonight Show in 1962. And through it all, through every success, every award, every milestone, Johnny kept thinking that maybe this would be the thing that made his father say the words he'd waited his entire life to hear. Homer Carson died in 1963. Johnny was already the most famous late-night host in America. He flew back to Iowa for the funeral. He gave a eulogy. He shook hands with people who told him how proud his father must have been. But Homer had never said it. Not once. Not even at the end. Johnny went back to Los Angeles. Back to the show. Back to making millions of people laugh every night. And he locked that wound away in the same place he kept all his private pain, deep, unreachable, never to be discussed. Until tonight. March 1982. When an 8-year-old boy in the front row asked the question Johnny's own father never answered. Subscribe and leave a comment, because the most powerful part of this story is still ahead. The studio remained silent. The audience sensed something profound was happening. The boy was still standing, still waiting with that patient, gentle expression. Johnny looked down at his desk. At the blue cue cards he'd been reading moments ago. At the coffee mug Ed had placed there before the show. At his hands, which were gripping the edge of the wooden surface. When he looked back up, his eyes were glistening. "No," Johnny said quietly. "No, he never did." The boy nodded slowly, as if this confirmed something he already knew. "My dad doesn't either," he said. "I just wanted to know if that was normal." The words hit Johnny like a physical blow. His throat worked. His jaw clenched. America's most composed television host was fighting tears on live television. Ed McMahon leaned forward in his chair. "Johnny." Johnny held up one hand. Not to Ed, but to the control room, to the producers, to everyone. The gesture was clear: don't stop this. Don't cut away. Let this happen. He stepped out from behind his desk. Not the casual stepping out he did for comedy bits. This was different. Purposeful. He walked toward the audience, toward the front row, toward the boy who had somehow seen through 20 years of perfect television performance to the wound underneath. The cameras followed him. Bobby Quinn, in the control room, whispered into his headset. "Camera 2, stay on Johnny. Camera 3, get the kid. This is... I don't know what this is, but don't miss it." Johnny stopped at the edge of the stage, looking down at the boy. "What's your name, son?" "Michael," the boy said. "Michael Patterson." "How old are you, Michael?" 8. "Almost 9. Johnny nodded. "And your dad, he doesn't tell you he's proud of you?" Michael shook his head. "He works a lot. He's tired when he comes home. I try to show him my drawings and my report cards, but he just says that's nice and goes to read the paper." The audience was crying now. Openly. 300 people bearing witness to a conversation that was somehow both intensely private and universally understood. Johnny looked at Michael's mother, who had tears streaming down her face. "Is your husband here tonight, ma'am?" She shook her head. "He's working. He doesn't really like television. I brought Michael because it's his birthday week and he loves your show." Backstage, he made a choice no producer would have ever allowed. Johnny crouched down at the edge of the stage, bringing himself to eye level with Michael. His knees protested. He was 56 years old, his body not as flexible as it used to be, but he didn't care. "Michael," Johnny said, his voice thick with emotion, "I need to tell you something very important. Can you listen carefully?" The boy nodded. "Your father's silence, it's not about you. It's about him. It's about what he learned from his own father, and what that man learned from his father. It's a chain of men who didn't know how to say the words, so they just didn't say them." Johnny paused, gathering himself. The entire studio waited. "I became the most watched person on television," Johnny continued. "Millions of people every night. Awards. Success. Everything I thought would make my father proud, And he never said it. Not once. He died without ever saying it. Michael's eyes widened. That's sad? Yeah, Johnny said, his voice breaking. It is sad. But Michael, I'm going to tell you something I wish someone had told me when I was 8 years old. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a pen, the same pen he used to sign autographs, to write notes to his staff, to mark up scripts. He looked at it for a moment, then handed it to Michael. This pen has signed a lot of important things. Contracts. Checks. Letters to presidents. But I want you to have it. And I want you to keep it. And years from now, when you're a father, and you will be, I can tell, I want you to remember this moment, and break that chain. Michael took the pen with both hands, holding it like it was made of glass. Tell your children you're proud of them, Johnny said. Every day. Even when they mess up. Even when they disappoint you. Especially then. Because the silence. His voice cracked completely now, tears running freely down his face. The silence is worse than anything. But this was the moment no one in the studio, nor anyone at home, ever saw coming. Michael looked at the pen, then at Johnny, then did something no one expected. He carefully set the pen down on the stage floor and stepped forward. He reached out and hugged Johnny Carson. An 8-year-old boy hugging America's most famous television host while cameras rolled live and 300 people watched through tears. Johnny wrapped his arms around Michael and held on. His shoulders shook. The microphone picked up everything. His ragged breathing, the small sounds of grief he'd held for nearly 60 years finally escaping. Ed McMahon was crying openly at the desk, not even trying to maintain composure. Doc Severinsen had set down his trumpet, one hand over his eyes. The audience was on their feet, but they weren't applauding yet. They were just standing, bearing witness, many of them crying for their own fathers, their own silences, their own unspoken words. When Michael finally stepped back, Johnny stayed crouched there for a moment, wiping his eyes with the back of his hand. He picked up the pen from the stage floor and held it out again. Please, Johnny said. Keep it. And remember. Michael took the pen. I will, Mr. Carson. And I'm really sorry your dad never told you. Johnny smiled through his tears. Me too, kiddo. Me too. He stood slowly, his knees aching, and looked at Michael's mother. Ma'am, would you do me a favor? Anything, she whispered. When your husband gets home tonight, show him this. The whole segment. And just asked him if maybe he could try saying the words. Not for you. Not for me. For Michael. Before it's too late. She nodded, unable to speak. Johnny walked back to his desk. The studio was still silent except for scattered sniffling. He sat down, looked at Ed, who managed a watery smile, and then turned to camera one. We're going to take a break, Johnny said, his voice raw. And when we come back, I don't know. Maybe we'll tell some jokes. Maybe we'll do something else. But right now, I just need a minute. The show cut to commercial. Share and subscribe. Make sure this story is never forgotten. During the commercial break, Johnny sat at his desk with his head in his hands. Fred DeCordova came down from the control room and put a hand on his shoulder. Johnny, that was... I've never seen anything like that in 30 years of television. Leave it in the broadcast, Johnny said. All of it. Don't cut a second. Are you sure? Johnny looked up, his eyes still red. If one father watches this and tells his son he's proud of him, it's worth it. The show came back. Johnny did one more segment, but his heart wasn't in the jokes. The audience didn't care. They'd already seen what they needed to see. After the taping, Johnny personally walked Michael and his mother to their car. He signed autographs for other audience members but kept looking back at the boy who'd changed his night. 3 days later, a letter arrived at NBC. From Michael's father. 2 sentences. I watched the show. I told my son I was proud of him. Thank you. Johnny had the letter framed and kept it in his dressing room until his final show in 1992. The pen never came back. Michael kept his promise, and still has it today. Share and subscribe. Make sure this story is never forgotten. When Johnny Carson died in 2005, Michael Patterson, then 31 years old and a father of two, wrote an obituary that appeared in several newspapers. The final line read, "He taught me that breaking silence takes more courage than keeping it. I tell my children I'm proud of them every single day." The chain was broken. Because one night, a boy asked a question. And Johnny Carson chose truth over performance.